I never thought inheriting a farm would lead to an all-out war. But I learned the hard way that the most vicious battles are often fought over the smallest patches of dirt, especially when a homeowners association is involved. My name is Mark, and I run a landscaping and small construction company. It's a good business. I'm good at it. I like tangible results, a well-laid stone patio, a perfectly graded lawn, a sturdy fence. I'm a practical man who appreciates simple, logical things. I prefer dirt under my fingernails to paperwork on my desk, and I've always believed that if you treat people fairly and do a good job, things will work out. For most of my life, that philosophy had served me well. My great-uncle Thomas was a different sort of man. He was a quiet, almost reclusive figure who lived on the same 100-acre farm his father had worked, and his grandfather before him. The farm sat on the edge of what had once been rolling countryside, but was now increasingly encroached upon by suburbia. Thomas had never married and had no children. As he got older, he leased out most of the fields to other farmers, but kept the main farmhouse, the big red barn, and about 20 acres immediately surrounding them for himself. He was my grandfather's brother, and while I didn't see him often, he always sent a card with a crisp $50 bill for my birthday, right up until he passed away at the ripe old age of 92. I was his closest living relative, so when the lawyer called, it wasn't a total shock that Thomas had left the farm to me. What was a shock was the sheer volume of legal wrangling it took to settle the estate. For nearly a year, the property sat in probate, a quiet, forgotten island of fallow fields and weathered wood, surrounded by a sea of manicured lawns and identical beige houses. This development was called Meadowbrook Estates, a name that was both idyllic and deeply ironic, given that they had paved over the brook and most of the meadow to build it. From what I'd gathered, the HOA there had started like most do, a necessary evil for managing common areas and ensuring the place didn't immediately fall into disrepair. For years, it was a sleepy, mostly functional entity. Then, about 5 years ago, a woman named Karen Chamberlain moved in. According to the stories that eventually trickled down to me, she arrived like a slow-moving but unstoppable weather front. She was a recent divorcee with a substantial settlement and an even more substantial amount of free time, which she dedicated with religious fervor to the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. She started by volunteering for a committee, then ran for the board, and within 2 years she was its president. And that's when the reign of petty tyranny began. The first changes were small, almost laughably trivial. She instituted a rule that all mailboxes had to be a specific model, purchased exclusively through an HOA-approved vendor for 3 times the price of a normal one. Then came the lawn decrees. Grass was to be maintained between 2 and 4 inches, not 1.9, not 4.1. She allegedly carried a ruler with her on her morning walks. Holiday decorations were next. A detailed 20-page document was issued, outlining the acceptable dates for display, no earlier than the Friday after Thanksgiving, no later than January 5th, the approved color palettes, no tacky multicolor lights, and the maximum number of inflatable snowmen per yard, 1, and it could not exceed 6 feet in height. The community, for the most part, grumbled but complied. It was easier than fighting. They were busy people with jobs and families, and arguing with a woman who seemed to derive her life's purpose from enforcing lawn statutes felt like a colossal waste of energy. They were content to let the sleeping, ruler-wielding dog lie. They didn't realize they were feeding a beast that would eventually try to devour them all. And it was a beast that had set its sights on the quiet, seemingly abandoned farm on its border. After a year of legal limbo, the deed was finally in my name. The keys to the old farmhouse, a heavy ring of skeleton keys that looked like they could unlock a medieval castle, felt solid and real in my hand. It was a Saturday morning in early June, bright and promising, and I drove out to the property for the first time as its official owner. My plan was simple: get a feel for the place, assess the condition of the house and barn, and start making a list of the 1,000 things that would need to be done. My truck, loaded with tools and testing equipment, rumbled down the long gravel driveway that connected the farm to the main road. A driveway that my great-uncle had fiercely protected as his own private access point. As I cleared the thicket of trees that shielded the farm from the main road, I stopped. The main field, the one that sloped gently down from the farmhouse, was not empty. It was crawling with people. White event tents were being erected, strings of fairy lights were being draped between low-hanging oak branches, and a large temporary stage was being assembled not 50 yards from the barn. A line of catering vans was parked near the fence line, and dozens of people in matching polo shirts scurried about, carrying tables and chairs. In the center of it all, directing the chaos with the imperious gestures of a battlefield commander, was a woman with a sharp blonde bob, wearing expensive-looking white slacks and a visor. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that this had to be Karen. I put the truck in park, got out, and started walking toward her. My boots crunched on the dry grass. A few of the workers paused to watch me, this stranger in jeans and a work shirt approaching their queen. As I got closer, she turned, her eyes narrowing. She held up a hand, palm out, as if to physically halt my progress from 20 feet away. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a private setup area. All vendors must check in at the front gate. You are not on the list." I kept walking, stopping about 5 feet from her. I could smell her perfume, an expensive, cloying scent that seemed completely out of place in the rustic setting. "I'm not a vendor," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm the owner." She let out a short, barking laugh. "The owner? That's very funny. Now, unless you're here to deliver the porta potties, I suggest you turn around and leave the way you came. This is HOA common property, and we are setting up for our annual summer gala." This was the moment. This was the fork in the road. I could have gotten back in my truck, called my lawyer, and started the slow, agonizing process of a legal fight. But looking at the sheer audacity of it all, the tents, the stage, the smug certainty on this woman's face as she stood on my land and told me to leave, sparked a fire in my gut. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a land grab, pure and simple. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet, then took out the folded copy of the grant deed the lawyer had given me just last week. "I think you're mistaken," I said, unfolding the paper. "This is the farm of the late Thomas Miller. I am his great-nephew, Mark Miller. And according to this legally executed and recorded deed, I am the new owner of this parcel, number 48B, all 100 acres of it, which means you," I gestured broadly at the tents and the workers, "are all trespassing." Her face, which had been a mask of smug authority, flickered through a series of emotions: confusion, then irritation, and finally, outright disbelief. She snatched the paper from my hand, her eyes scanning it with furious speed. She was looking for a flaw, a loophole, anything that would prove me wrong. Finding none, she shoved it back at my chest. "This is a forgery," she snapped. "A joke. This property has been abandoned for years. It has reverted to community use. We have been holding our gala here for the last 4 years without a single complaint." "My great-uncle was a very private man," I countered, my voice still calm, though it was taking effort. "He probably didn't even notice you were here. Or he was too old to care. But he's gone now, and I care. This is private property. The gala is not happening here. You have 1 hour to get your people and your equipment off my land." The color rose in her cheeks, turning her face a blotchy red. She took a step closer, jabbing a finger toward me. "Listen to me, you little squatter," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but you are making a very big mistake. This is Meadowbrook Estates. We have standards, we have rules, and we have a very, very good legal team. If you are not off this property in 10 minutes, I will have you arrested for trespassing. And then I will start fining you. I will fine you for interfering with a community event. I will fine you for the unmitigated disaster you call a landscape. I will fine you until you can't afford to buy a cup of coffee. Do you understand me?" It was the sheer, unadulterated venom in her voice that solidified my resolve. This wasn't about a party anymore. This was a declaration of war. "I understand you perfectly," I said, my voice turning cold. "And you need to understand me. This is my land. You are not welcome here. The party is canceled. Get out." I turned my back on her, pulled out my phone, and dialed the number for the county sheriff's office. I was going to need a deputy. The war had begun. The arrival of a sheriff's deputy did little to defuse the situation. It merely formalized the battle lines. Deputy Evans was a young man with a calm demeanor who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He listened patiently as Karen launched into a tirade about me being a con artist, a squatter, and a threat to her community. She presented her case as if she were a prosecuting attorney, claiming long-standing precedent and community right of use for the abandoned property. She spoke of the HOA's investment in the gala, the non-refundable deposits, and the terrible disappointment it would be for the children. When she finally paused for breath, Deputy Evans turned to me. I simply handed him my driver's license and the same crisp official copy of the deed I had shown Karen. I also showed him the digital record on the county assessor's website, which clearly listed my name as the owner of Parcel 48B. He spent a few minutes looking from the papers to his cruiser's laptop and back again. Finally, he sighed. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Karen, "the paperwork seems to be in order. This is Mr. Miller's property. Legally, you and your people are trespassing." Karen's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. Are you taking his side? We are a pillar of this community. He showed up 5 minutes ago with a piece of paper." "It's a legally recorded deed, ma'am," the deputy said tiredly. "That's more than a piece of paper. It's the law. I can't force you to leave without a court order, as this is a civil matter. But I can advise you that remaining here against the owner's wishes opens you and your organization up to significant legal liability." He looked at me. "Sir, I'd recommend you contact a lawyer." Then he looked back at Karen. "And I'd recommend you do the same. My official report will state that the landowner has requested you vacate the premises." With that, he tipped his hat, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and unresolved tension in his wake. Karen was momentarily stunned into silence, but it didn't last. She whirled on me. "This isn't over," she snarled. "You've won this little skirmish, but you've just started a war you can't win. The gala is postponed, not canceled, and you are going to regret this." She barked orders at her volunteers, and with a great deal of resentful muttering and angry glares in my direction, they began the slow process of dismantling their party. I stood by the old barn and watched them, feeling not triumphant, but weary. I had just wanted to see my uncle's farm. The first official letter arrived 2 days later. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA logo embossed in gold at the top. It was a notice of violation. Violation 1. Unmaintained landscape. The letter stated that my fields of native grasses and wildflowers were an eyesore and not in compliance with community aesthetic standards. I was ordered to have the entire 20-acre field professionally mowed, landscaped, and sodded with an approved turf blend within 14 days. The estimated cost for such a project would have been astronomical. Violation 2. Unapproved structure. The beautiful, historic red barn, a structure that had stood for over a century, was deemed a dilapidated and unsafe outbuilding. I was ordered to either submit architectural plans for its complete restoration to HOA standards or have it demolished. Violation 3. Nuisance vehicle. My work truck, a clean and well-maintained Ford F-250, was parked on my own property, yet it was cited for being a commercial vehicle stored in a residential area. Each violation came with an initial fine of $500, with an additional $100 for every day they were not cured. A bill for $1,500 was included. It was so absurd I almost laughed. They had no jurisdiction. The farm was never part of Meadowbrook Estates. It was a separate parcel with its own deed, its own history. My property line was the fence, and their authority ended there. I wrote a short, polite letter back, explaining this fact and including another copy of my deed and the relevant plat map showing the clear boundary. I stated that their rules did not apply to my property and that I considered the matter closed. I sent it via certified mail. Her response was to double the fines. A second letter arrived, this one more hostile in tone. It informed me that my failure to comply had resulted in the doubling of all penalties. My bill was now $3,000, plus daily accruing charges. It also included a new violation: failure to adhere to Architectural Review Committee directives. It was clear that reason and logic were not going to work. Karen was not interested in the law. She was interested in punishment. She had been publicly humiliated on my land, and she was going to make me pay for it, one bogus fine at a time. A few days later, while I was clearing out some of the junk from the farmhouse porch, an older gentleman approached from the direction of the neighboring development. He was lean, with a kind, wrinkled face and a slow, steady gait. "You must be Thomas's boy," he said, his voice warm. "I'm Arthur Hemmings. I live just over there." He pointed to a neat little house on the other side of the fence. "I was a friend of your uncle's for 30 years. We shook hands, and I immediately liked him. I invited him up for a glass of lemonade, and we sat on the porch swing, the chain groaning a familiar rhythmic protest. He told me stories about my great-uncle, about his quiet generosity and his stubborn independence. Then, hesitantly, he brought up the HOA. "I heard what happened with Karen and the gala," he said, shaking his head. "She's a piece of work, that one. Has the whole neighborhood terrified." He told me about Mrs. Gable, a widow in her 80s who had lived in her home since the development was built. Her husband had been an avid gardener, and he'd populated their small yard with a collection of cheerful garden gnomes. After he passed, she kept them as a memory of him. Karen declared them tacky yard art, and in violation of the new aesthetic code, Arthur explained, his voice tight with anger. She started fining that poor woman $200 a week. Mrs. Gable is on a fixed income. She was in tears at the last meeting, begging them to stop. Karen told her that rules are rules and that her personal sentimentality was not the HOA's concern. Hearing that story changed something in me. My fight with Karen had been about a principle, about my property rights. But hearing about Mrs. Gable made it personal. This wasn't just a petty tyrant trying to bully me. She was preying on the vulnerable. She was using the flimsy shield of HOA bylaws to make people miserable for her own sense of power. My resolve hardened. I wasn't just going to defend my property anymore. I was going to dismantle her little empire. The final straw came a week later. It was another thick envelope. This one was from the HOA's legal firm. It was a formal notice of intent to file lien. They claimed I now owed over $10,000 in unpaid fines and fees, and if I did not pay in full within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my farm. A lien on a property they had no legal claim to, for fines they had no authority to levy. It was a move of such breathtaking arrogance that it clarified everything. This was no longer a squabble. It was extortion. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best, most notoriously aggressive real estate litigator in the county. His name was David Chen, and his reputation preceded him. He was known for being brilliant, expensive, and utterly ruthless in court. When I explained the situation to him over the phone, there was a long pause. I thought for a moment he was going to tell me it was too petty a case for him. Then he chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I believe we are going to have a great deal of fun with this. When can you come in?" My meeting with David Chen was an education. His office was on the top floor of a downtown building, all glass and steel, with a panoramic view of the city. David himself was impeccably dressed, sharp and focused, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making a note on a yellow legal pad. I handed him the stack of letters from Karen and the HOA, the deed, the plat maps, everything. He reviewed the documents in silence for about 10 minutes, his expression unreadable. "This is classic petty tyrant syndrome," he said at last, leaning back in his chair. "She has zero legal standing. The farm was never annexed into the HOA. Her rules are about as applicable to you as the laws of Monaco. The lien threat is frivolous and constitutes harassment. We can get this all thrown out, of course." He paused, tapping a pen on his desk. "But just getting it thrown out feels insufficient. Don't you think?" I nodded. "It does. She's bullying an entire neighborhood. I want to do more than just get her off my back. I want to make sure she can't do this to anyone else, like Mrs. Gable and her gnomes. A slow smile spread across David's face. I like the way you think, Mark. A defensive strategy is boring. Let's go on the offensive. A person this arrogant, this certain of her own power, always makes mistakes. She's overplayed her hand, and now we're going to look at the cards she's trying to hide. He stood up and walked to a large map of the county on his wall. We're going to pull every document related to Meadowbrook Estates. The original incorporation papers, the full book of covenants and restrictions, the minutes from every board meeting for the past 5 years. We're also going to subpoena their complete financial records. He turned to me. But the real key might be somewhere else. You said your great-uncle was a private man, but he kept things. Does the farmhouse have an attic? The attic was exactly as you'd imagine, hot, dusty, and smelling of old paper and cedar. It was a treasure trove of my family's history. There were steamer trunks filled with old clothes, boxes of sepia-toned photographs, and stacks of my great-aunt's journals. But what I was looking for was my great-uncle's business records. Thomas, for all his reclusive tendencies, had been a meticulous record keeper. In the series of dusty file cabinets tucked under the eaves, I found everything. Decades of tax returns, old equipment manuals, and, most importantly, a thick folder labeled Meadowbrook. I spent the next several evenings up there, a headlamp strapped to my forehead, sneezing from the dust as I sifted through a history I never knew. The first discovery was a small victory. It was a folder of invoices and cashed checks from 12 years ago. The Meadowbrook HOA, long before Karen's time, had formally requested and paid my great-uncle $100 per event to use a small 5-acre corner of his land for overflow parking during their annual festivities. It was irrefutable proof. They knew from the very beginning that it was private land. They had a history of paying for its use. Karen's claim that it was abandoned common property was not just a mistake, it was a deliberate lie. I brought the folder to David, triumphant. He was pleased. "This is excellent," he said, examining the checks. "This kills their adverse possession or prescriptive easement arguments dead in the water. They can't claim a right to use land they have a documented history of paying to rent." He leaned forward. "But this is just a shield, Mark. It's a great defense. I want a sword. Keep digging." So I kept digging. I went through old letters, property tax assessments, and survey documents. And then I found it. It wasn't in a folder. It was at the bottom of a heavy oak chest, rolled up and tied with a faded red ribbon. It was a thick, multi-page document, an original copy, bearing the seals of the county and a prominent local developer. The title at the top read, "Easement and Development Agreement between Thomas Miller and Northwood Development Corporation." My hands trembled slightly as I untied the ribbon and carefully unrolled the brittle paper on the dusty floor. Northwood Development Corporation was the company that had built Meadowbrook Estates. This was the master agreement, the foundational document that allowed the development to exist. I read it slowly, my legal vocabulary expanding with every paragraph. It detailed the sale of the land, the zoning changes, and all the required conditions. And then, on page 4, I found the turning point. I found the sword. To build Meadowbrook Estates, the developers needed to manage the stormwater runoff from over 200 homes. The natural topography of the land meant the only logical place for the main drainage outflow and a large retention pond was on the far southeastern corner of my great-uncle's remaining property. The document laid out a formal, permanent easement, granting the development, and by extension, its future HOA, the right to use that specific 2-acre plot for their drainage system in perpetuity. But my great-uncle, bless his stubborn, foresightful heart, had insisted on a clause. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood it. Section 4, subsection C. The grantee, the HOA, is responsible for the full and complete maintenance of said easement property. Furthermore, this easement is granted contingent upon the grantor, Thomas Miller and his heirs and assigns, being afforded full and peaceful enjoyment of the remainder of his property. Should the grantee or its agents interfere with, harass, or otherwise deny the grantor said peaceful enjoyment of his unencumbered property, the grantor, at his sole discretion, may declare the grantee in breach of this agreement. Upon written notification of said breach, the grantee shall have 30 days to cure all infringements. Failure to do so will result in the immediate and permanent termination of this easement. I sat there, on the floor of the dusty attic, the beam of my headlamp illuminating the dense legal text. I had found it. The entire drainage system for a multi-million-dollar housing development. The system that prevented 200 basements from flooding every time it rained was built on my land, and its existence was contingent on the HOA playing nice. Karen, in her blind arrogance, hadn't just picked a fight with me. She had picked a fight with the man who held the kill switch for her entire community's infrastructure. My strategy shifted immediately from defense to offense. David was ecstatic when I showed him the document. He called it the most beautifully crafted legal poison pill he had ever seen. "Your great-uncle wasn't just a farmer, Mark," he said with genuine admiration. "He was a strategic genius. He knew that one day his new neighbors might become a problem, so he built a nuke and hid it in his back pocket. Our plan was simple and brutal. We would not reveal our hand just yet. We would let Karen continue down her path of self-destruction." The HOA had scheduled a special community meeting in 2 weeks. The official agenda item was to discuss and vote upon remedial actions regarding Parcel 48B, including the levy of fines and the placement of a property lien. It was to be her public triumph, the moment she would legally cement her victory over the defiant squatter. We decided to let her have her meeting. It would be the perfect stage for our counterattack. In the meantime, I engaged in a bit of what you might call strategic provocation. I bought 100 no trespassing private property signs and, with painstaking precision, installed one every 10 feet along the entire length of my fence line bordering Meadowbrook Estates. I spent a weekend with a rented brush hog, clearing the area around the old barn and the farmhouse, but leaving the rest of the 20-acre field in its wild, natural state. A beautiful expanse of Queen Anne's lace and black-eyed Susans that I knew drove Karen insane. I was complying with the law, on my land, while simultaneously poking the bear. The fines continued to arrive, the amounts growing more fantastical with each letter. My alleged debt was now somewhere north of $25,000. I saved every envelope. Arthur kept me updated on the neighborhood chatter. Karen was spinning a wild tale of a dangerous antisocial recluse who was trying to destroy their community values. She was whipping her supporters into a frenzy, ensuring a large, hostile turnout for her show trial. Arthur, meanwhile, was quietly talking to his own network of neighbors, the ones who were tired of the bullying, the ones who missed the old quiet days, and especially the ones who felt for Mrs. Gable. He encouraged them to come to the meeting too, to at least hear the other side of the story. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It was a sterile beige room that smelled faintly of air freshener and resentment. I had seen photos of past HOA meetings where only the 5 board members and maybe 2 other residents showed up. Tonight, every chair was filled, and people were standing along the back wall. Karen and her board sat at a long table at the front, looking self-important and grim. She held a gavel in her hand like it was a scepter. I sat in the front row with David, who was dressed in a razor-sharp suit and looked as calm as if he were waiting for a bus. Karen banged the gavel. "This special meeting of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice resonating with manufactured authority. She launched into a long, sanctimonious preamble about the importance of community, of shared values, and of protecting their property values from outside threats. She painted a picture of me as a nefarious outsider, a lawless vagrant who had appeared out of nowhere to thumb his nose at their cherished way of life. She detailed my violations: the overgrown field, the derelict barn, the illegal commercial truck. She presented the mountain of fines as a reasonable and necessary response to my intransigence. "This man," she said, pointing a dramatic finger at me, "has refused to engage with us reasonably. He has ignored our notices. He has flaunted his disregard for our rules. Therefore, the board has been left with no choice. We are here tonight to vote on a motion to place a significant lien on his property, Parcel 48B, for the amount of $32,700 in unpaid fines and legal fees. This is the only way to compel compliance and protect the integrity of Meadowbrook. She looked out at the crowd, expecting applause. Instead, she got a tense, uncertain silence. "The board now moves to a vote," she declared. "Point of order, Madam President." David's voice cut through the room, calm and clear. He stood up slowly. "Before you vote on an action that is both illegal and financially reckless, my client, Mr. Mark Miller, the legal owner of Parcel 48B, would like to address the association." Karen glared at him. "This is not an open forum for non-members. Mr. Miller has no standing here." "On the contrary," David said smoothly, "since you are attempting to take financial action against him, he has every standing. And I believe the homeowners of this community have a right to be fully informed before they vote to embroil themselves in a very expensive and unwinnable lawsuit." He didn't wait for her permission, instead walking to the small lectern set up for residents. He placed a thin file folder on it. The room was dead silent. "Good evening," he began. "My name is David Chen. I represent Mr. Miller. I'd like to clear up a few factual inaccuracies. First, the matter of ownership." He held up a document. "This is a copy of an invoice from the Meadowbrook HOA to the late Thomas Miller, dated June 2008. It's for the rental of his field for your gala's parking. We have a dozen more just like it. Your own records show that you have always known this was private property. Your current claim that it is common land is therefore not a mistake. It is a deliberate falsehood. It's fraud." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face had gone rigid. "That was a previous board," she snapped. "It's irrelevant." "Fraud is always relevant," David replied without missing a beat. "Second, the fines. Since Mr. Miller's farm was never part of this HOA, your covenants do not apply to it. Every fine you have issued is legally void. The lien you are proposing to vote on is not only unenforceable, it is malicious and constitutes tortious interference. If you vote to approve it, we will not only sue the HOA, we will sue every board member individually for damages." The other board members, a mousy-looking treasurer and a beefy man who looked like a former football player, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They exchanged nervous glances. The crowd was getting restless. This was not the simple rubber stamp execution they had been promised. "But that," David continued, his voice dropping slightly, "is not the most serious issue you are facing tonight. The most serious issue is not what my client has done, but what your president has led you all into." He picked up the final document from his file. It was the easement agreement. "I have here a copy of the foundational document for this entire development, the 2001 Easement and Development Agreement between Northwood Development and Thomas Miller." He held it up for all to see. "This document grants the HOA the right to use a 2-acre section of my client's land for your primary stormwater retention pond and drainage outflow. A critical piece of infrastructure, I'm sure you'll agree." He paused, letting that sink in. "However, your right to use that land is not absolute. It is contingent, and I quote, upon the grantor being afforded full and peaceful enjoyment of the remainder of his property. It further states that if the HOA or its agents, that would be you, Madam President, harass or interfere with the owner, you are in breach of the agreement." The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Karen was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped the gavel. "For the last month," David's voice rang out, "your board president has engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment against my client. She has trespassed on his land, issued fraudulent fines, and is now attempting to place an illegal lien on his property. These are not the actions of a good neighbor. They are the actions of a bully, and they are a clear and undeniable breach of the single most important legal document underpinning this community." He looked directly at Karen, his expression like ice. "Therefore, as of this moment, we are officially serving the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association with a notice of breach. According to the terms your own development was built on, you have 30 days to cure. That means dropping all fines, issuing a formal written apology to Mr. Miller, and removing yourself, Karen Chamberlain, as president and as a member of the board. If you fail to meet these terms within 30 days, The easement will be permanently terminated." He turned to the audience. "And what does that mean for all of you?" he asked rhetorically. "It means your entire development will be in violation of county code. No one will be able to sell their home. The county could issue a stop work order on all new construction, and you will be collectively responsible for the tens of millions of dollars it would cost to re-engineer and rebuild your entire storm drainage system, assuming you could even acquire the land to do it. All because your president couldn't stand being told no." The collapse was immediate and total. A man in the back of the room, who I later learned was a civil engineer, stood up. "He's right," the man said, his voice shaking with anger. "Terminating that easement would be catastrophic. It would bankrupt this association and cripple every homeowner's property value." All eyes turned to Karen. Her authority, once so absolute, had evaporated in the space of 5 minutes. She was no longer a president. She was the woman who had led them to the edge of a cliff. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at the other board members for support, but they recoiled from her as if she were contagious. The beefy man stood up. "Karen, did you know about this?" he demanded. "Did you know you were putting us all at risk?" She just stared at him, speechless. Then her rage finally broke through her shock. "This is a trick!" she shrieked, slamming the gavel down with such force that its wooden head snapped off and skittered across the table. "He's a liar! They're all lies!" But no one was listening. The room erupted in a cacophony of angry, frightened voices, all directed at her. People were shouting, demanding her resignation, demanding to know how she could have been so reckless. She stood there for a moment, cornered and exposed, her face a mask of disbelief. Then, with a choked sob of fury, she turned and fled the room, pushing her way through the angry crowd and out into the night. The war was over. I had won. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and brutal. Karen's reign didn't just end, it was obliterated. The remaining board members, terrified of the personal liability David had so clearly laid out, resigned in a cascade of emails the very next morning. The HOA was effectively rudderless, facing a 30-day deadline that ticked like a time bomb. An emergency session was called by the homeowners themselves, led by the civil engineer who had spoken up and my new friend, Arthur Hemmings. David and I attended, not as adversaries, but as consultants. The first order of business for the newly formed interim committee was to vote unanimously to accept all of our terms. That afternoon, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the farmhouse. Inside was a formal, groveling letter of apology signed by the interim board, a document officially rescinding all fines and violations, and a statement confirming that the motion to file a lien was void. They had met our demands. The easement was safe. The nuke was back in its silo. But the homeowners were not finished with Karen. Fueled by a potent combination of righteous anger and financial terror, they voted to fund a full, independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances, covering her entire 5-year presidency. They wanted to know where every single penny had gone. What the auditors uncovered was worse than anyone expected. It wasn't just incompetence and reckless spending, it was systematic theft. The audit revealed that the approved vendor for the ridiculously expensive mailboxes was a shell company registered to Karen's maiden name. She had been pocketing a $200 markup on every single one. The landscaping company that had been receiving exorbitant fees for community beautification projects was owned by her cousin, and their invoices were padded with charges for work that was never done. The summer gala, her pet project, was a slush fund. She had been faking invoices from rental companies and caterers, skimming thousands of dollars each year. My great-uncle's invoices, which I had found in the attic, became a key piece of evidence, proving what legitimate event expenses looked like, starkly contrasting with her fraudulent ones. Armed with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the interim board took the audit report directly to the district attorney's office. Criminal charges were filed. Karen Chamberlain, the once feared queen of Meadowbrook Estates, was charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Her assets were frozen, and her carefully constructed world of power and prestige came crashing down. The legal battle was long, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary, plus full financial restitution to the HOA. In the wake of the scandal, Meadowbrook Estates began to heal. The community, galvanized by the crisis, came together to completely rewrite their bylaws. The ridiculous rules about lawn height and holiday decorations were scrapped. The focus shifted from punitive enforcement to genuine community building. Arthur Hemmings, to his great surprise, was elected the new HOA president by a landslide. His first official act was to personally visit Mrs. Gable, inform her that all fines against her were forgiven, and tell her that her husband's garden gnomes were a treasured part of the neighborhood's character. For my part, I was treated as something of a local hero, a title that always made me feel a bit awkward. The new board, as a gesture of goodwill, offered me a lucrative contract to take over all of the community's landscaping and snow removal services. The irony was not lost on me. I was now being paid handsomely to care for the very lawns Karen had tried to fine me into oblivion over. I accepted. It was good work, and the people were my neighbors now. All threats against me and my property were gone, replaced by waves and friendly greetings whenever my truck passed through the neighborhood. My vindication was complete. A few years have passed since that tumultuous summer. The farm is no longer a quiet, forgotten island. It's my home. I restored the old farmhouse, preserving its historic character while making it comfortable and modern inside. The magnificent red barn, once deemed a derelict structure, is now the centerpiece of my business. I store my equipment there, and I've converted one of the large bays into a workshop. I've started cultivating 10 of the acres closest to the house, turning them into a small-scale organic market garden. On Saturday mornings, I sell fresh vegetables, eggs from my flock of free-range chickens, and wildflowers from a small stand at the end of my driveway. Many of my best customers are my neighbors from Meadowbrook Estates. The community itself is thriving. Under Arthur's gentle guidance, the HOA has become what it was always supposed to be, a quiet, helpful organization that maintains the common areas and throws a genuinely fun neighborhood barbecue once a year. They hold it at the community park now, not in my field. Property values have gone up, not because of draconian rules, but because it has become a genuinely pleasant and friendly place to live. The sense of community, forged in the fire of Karen's downfall, has proven to be strong and lasting. I did see her one last time. It was about a year ago. I was loading up supplies at a big box hardware store in a town about 30 miles away. As I was heading to the checkout, I saw a woman in a faded orange employee vest methodically restocking a shelf of light bulbs. Her hair was no longer a sharp blonde bob, but a dull, lifeless gray pulled back in a stringy ponytail. She looked tired and much older. It was Karen. Our eyes met for just a second. I saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of shame that washed over her face. She immediately dropped her gaze and turned away, busying herself with a box of inventory. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I felt a brief, surprising pang of pity for the diminished figure she had become, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, and her chapter was closed. Sometimes, when I'm out on my tractor in the evenings, tilling the rich soil my great-uncle left me, I reflect on the whole bizarre ordeal. It's strange to think how a dispute over a party in a field could escalate into a legal war that reshaped an entire community. It taught me that petty power is a dangerous drug, and those who abuse it will eventually be consumed by it. Tyrants, big and small, often sow the seeds of their own destruction in the very rules they use to control others. They count on people being too scared, too tired, or too isolated to fight back. But it also taught me the power of a community united. When good people are pushed too far, they find a strength they never knew they had. My fight became their fight, and together we reclaimed our peace. I never set out to be a hero or a community champion. I'm just a guy who inherited a farm and wanted to be left alone. I like fixing things, building things, making things grow. And in a way, that's what happened. We broke down a toxic system, and in its place, something better grew. As the sun sets over my fields, casting long shadows from the old red barn, I feel a deep sense of peace. This is my land. This is my home. and the quiet is finally real.